The Prodigal's Ghost. The wrought iron gates of Thorne Manor didn't just open, they groaned, a rusted, metallic protest against the return of the daughter who had vowed never to come back. Julianne Thorne gripped the steering wheel of her rented SUV until her knuckles turned the color of the seafoam crashing against the Blackwood Bay cliffs. Outside, the main fog was a living thing, thick and suffocating, swallowing the headlights. 10 years of silence was supposed to be enough time for the ghosts of this house to starve. But as the jagged Victorian eaves of the manor pierced through the gloom, Julianne realized the ghosts hadn't starved at all. They had been waiting. She parked the car and stepped out. The air tasted of salt and expensive funeral lilies. The front doors swung open before she could reach for the brass knocker. Standing in the amber glow of the foyer was Eleanor Thorne. At 38, her father's widow was only 6 years older than Julianne, but she carried the poise of a queen and the warmth of a glacier. She was draped in silk the color of an oil slick. "Julianne," Eleanor said, her voice a polished blade, "you're late for the viewing. Your father is already in the parlor." "I'm sure he doesn't mind the wait, Eleanor. He's practiced at being dead to me," Julianne replied, stepping past her. The interior of Thorne Manor was exactly as she remembered. Mahogany walls, family portraits with eyes that followed you, and a silence so heavy it felt like physical pressure. But as she walked toward the parlor, she stopped. Standing by the grand staircase was a man she hadn't seen in a decade. Caleb Reed. He wasn't the gardener's boy anymore. He was filled out, dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than her first car, his jawline honed to a dangerous edge. When his eyes met hers, Julianne felt a jolt of electricity and a sharp, familiar ache. "Jules," he whispered. The nickname was a ghost of a summer night 10 years ago, a promise broken by her father's interference. "Caleb," she managed, her voice trembling, "I heard you were working for the estate now. I didn't realize that meant you were Eleanor's shadow." Caleb's expression hardened. "I'm the family lawyer, Julianne. I do what the Thorne name requires." Before she could respond, a crash echoed from the parlor. Julianne bolted into the room to find her brother, Marcus, swaying over their father's open casket. He held a crystal tumbler of scotch, his eyes bloodshot and wild. "She's here," Marcus laughed, a hollow, jagged sound. "The golden child returns to claim the scraps. Tell me, Jules, did you come for the money, or did you come to see if the old man finally stopped breathing on his own?" "Marcus, sit down," Julianne said, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Why? Are you afraid he'll wake up?" Marcus leaned in close to Julianne, smelling of peat and desperation. He lowered his voice to a frantic whisper. "He didn't just die, Jules. He's screaming for you the night it happened. But Eleanor, she didn't call you. She didn't call anyone until it was too late." Julianne looked up. Eleanor was standing in the doorway, her face a mask of serene concern, but her fingers were white where they gripped her pearls. Behind her, Caleb stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Marcus is unwell," Eleanor said smoothly. "The grief has unmoored him." "It's not grief," he hissed, pointing a finger at Eleanor. "It's the truth. Ask her about the tea, Julianne. Ask her why the nurses were sent home early that night." Suddenly, the lights in the manor flickered and died. For 5 seconds, the house was plunged into a terrifying, absolute black. Julianne felt a hand brush against her arm, a firm, urgent grip. "Don't drink anything in this house," a voice breathed into her ear. It was Caleb. The lights hummed back to life. Caleb was across the room again, helping a stumbling Marcus into a chair. Eleanor was staring at Julianne, a faint, chilling smile playing on her lips. "You look tired, dear. We've prepared your old room. Sleep well. We have the reading of the will tomorrow, and I think you'll find that your father had surprises in store for all of us." As Jillian climbed the stairs, she looked back. Caleb was watching her, his silhouette framed by the coffin of the man who had ruined their lives. She realized then that she hadn't just come home for a funeral. She'd walked into a trap. The storm that had been brewing over the Atlantic finally broke at 3 a.m. Rain lashed against Julianne's bedroom window like gravel, and the old Victorian house groaned under the wind. Julianne lay awake, the silk sheets of her childhood bed feeling like a shroud. "Don't drink anything in this house." Caleb's warning echoed in her mind. He was hiding something. She could see it in the way his eyes avoided hers. But his touch had felt like the only real thing in a house built on smoke and mirrors. The midnight discovery. Driven by a restless hunger for answers, Julianne slipped out of bed. She moved down the hallway, her bare feet silent on the cold hardwood. She reached her father's private study, the door heavy and imposing. To her surprise, it was unlocked. The room smelled of stale tobacco and old leather. Julianne flicked on a small desk lamp. The glow illuminated a stack of medical files. She flipped through them, reports on her father's heart condition, prescriptions for digitalis, but one page caught her eye. It was a handwritten note from Elias, dated 3 days before his death. The handwriting was a frantic scrawl. "She thinks I don't see the sediment in the cup. My mind is clouding, but my eyes are open. Jay, if you find this, look behind the blue." The note ended abruptly. A smear of ink trailed off the page, as if the pen had been snatched away. "Looking for something, Julianne?" Julianne gasped, spinning around. Eleanor was standing in the shadows of the doorway, wearing a cream-colored dressing gown. In her hand, she held a steaming mug of tea. "I couldn't sleep," Julianne said, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "I was looking for a photo of my mother." Eleanor stepped into the light. The shadows under her cheekbones made her look skeletal. "Your father became quite paranoid at the end. He hid things, meaningless things. You shouldn't trouble yourself with his delusions." Eleanor set the tea on the desk, right over the note Julianne had been reading. "Drink this. It's chamomile. It will help with the nerves." "I'm fine," Julianne said, her eyes darting to the cup. "I think I'll just go back to bed." "I insist," Eleanor whispered, her voice dropping an octave. "It's a Thorne family tradition, isn't it? Hospitality until the bitter end." For a moment, the air in the room turned ice cold. Julianne saw a flicker of something in Eleanor's eyes, not grief, but a predatory hunger. The standoff was broken by the sound of a heavy door slamming downstairs and the muffled shout of Marcus. Eleanor sighed, the tension breaking. "He's at the liquor cabinet again. Excuse me." The gathering. The next morning, the sun was a pale, sickly yellow. The family gathered in the library for the reading of the will. The air was thick with the scent of floor wax and unspoken threats. Caleb stood at the head of the table, his face a professional mask. He wouldn't look at Julianne. He opened a heavy leather folder and began to read in a steady, rhythmic tone. "To my son, Marcus, I leave the sum of $500,000 held in a restrictive trust contingent upon his completion of a rehabilitation program." Marcus let out a derisive snort, cheap to the last breath. "To my wife, Eleanor, I leave the Thorne Manor and the controlling interest in Thorne Shipping, unless—" Eleanor's hand froze halfway to her face. "Unless?" "If my daughter Julianne remains in the house for 30 consecutive days. If she stays, the controlling interest is split 50-50 between Julianne and Eleanor. If Julianne leaves before the 30 days are up, everything, the house, the company, the Thorne name, reverts entirely to Eleanor." The room went silent. It was a sick game. Elias knew they hated each other. He'd turned the house into a cage. "There's more," Caleb said, his voice dropping. "A private codicil. If any party is found to be responsible for my death through negligence or intent, their share is forfeited to the state. The betrayal. The meeting broke up in a flurry of hushed arguments. Julianne followed Caleb into the hallway, catching him by the arm. "You knew," she hissed. "You knew he wrote that will to pit us against each other." Caleb pulled her into a small alcove, his hand pressing against the wall beside her head. He was so close she could smell his cedarwood cologne. "I didn't just know, Jules. I helped him write it. I was trying to protect you." "Protect me by locking me in a house with a woman who might have poisoned him?" Caleb's eyes searched hers, a flash of the boy she once loved breaking through the lawyer's veneer. But his touch had felt like the only real thing in a house built on smoke and mirrors. "If you leave, Eleanor gets the power to bury the truth forever. Stay, please, but don't trust anyone." He leaned in, his lips inches from hers, the tension between them snapping like a live wire. For a second, Julianne thought he would kiss her, a desperate, mourning kiss. But then he pulled back, his face turning cold again. He reached into his pocket and handed her a small, crumpled piece of paper. "He found this in the shredder this morning. It was Eleanor's travel itinerary for the night your father died." Julianne opened the paper. It wasn't an itinerary for a business trip. It was a receipt from a private clinic, a toxicology lab, 3 towns over. Julianne looked up, but Caleb was already walking away. As she turned to go back to her room, she saw Marcus standing at the end of the hall, his face pale as a ghost. "Jules," he croaked, pointing to the portrait of their father. "The eyes. Look at the eyes." Julianne looked at the massive oil painting. A small red light was blinking from the pupil of Elias Thorne's left eye. A hidden camera. Someone hadn't just been watching the house. They had been recording everything. And if the camera was still recording, then whoever was on the other end had just seen Caleb give her that note. The red light in the portrait's eye felt like a laser burn on Julianne's skin. She didn't look back. She didn't scream. Instead, she walked to her room with the rigid gait of a soldier, her mind racing. "Look behind the blue." Her father's note haunted her. In Thorne Manor, there were a dozen things that were blue. The Delft tiles in the kitchen, the navy velvet curtains in the dining room, the sapphire silk in Eleanor's parlor. But as the clock struck midnight, Julianne remembered. The blue room wasn't a room at all. It was the nickname for the old root cellar in the basement, painted a garish cerulean by her mother decades ago in a failed attempt to make the windowless stone space feel like the sky. A cold encounter. Julianne crept into the kitchen, the floorboards groaning under her weight. She reached for the basement door, but a hand clamped over her mouth and a strong arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her into the pantry. She struggled, her elbow finding a soft ribs, until a familiar voice hissed into her ear. "It's me. Stop fighting." Caleb. He released her, his breathing heavy. In the dim light of the pantry, his eyes were shadowed with exhaustion. "You're going to get yourself killed, Jules. I saw you looking at the portrait. You know about the cameras." "Who is watching, Caleb? Eleanor or you?" Julianne poked a finger into his chest. "You're playing both sides. You're her lawyer, but you're handing me receipts. Which one is it?" Caleb grabbed her wrist, his grip firm but not painful. The air between them hummed with 10 years of unspent resentment and desire. "I'm on the side that keeps you breathing, Jules." Elias knew Eleanor was draining the company accounts. He was going to cut her out of the will entirely, but he died 2 days before the signing. "I had to scramble to put that 30-day clause in the old draft just to give you a fighting chance." "So you did love him more than me," she spat, her voice trembling. Caleb's gaze softened, his thumb brushing against the pulse point on her wrist. "I stayed because he promised me that if I protected the legacy, he'd make sure you came home. I did it for you." Before she could process the confession, he leaned down, his lips crashing against hers. It was a desperate, hungry kiss, tasting of salt and secrets. For a moment, the danger of the house vanished. It was just them, 2 broken pieces of a childhood tragedy trying to fit back together. He pulled away just as quickly. "Go to the cellar. I'll watch the monitors from the library to see if Eleanor wakes. If I flicker the hall lights twice, get out." The secret beneath the stone. Julianne descended the stone steps into the basement. The air was frigid, smelling of damp earth and rot. She found the blue room, a small, cramped storage space at the far end of the cellar. She began to tear at the walls, her fingernails chipping against the blue-painted stones. She felt behind the heavy oak shelving, her fingers brushing against something cold and metallic. A small Victorian-style keyhole was embedded directly into the masonry. The blue. She remembered the locket her mother had left her, the one she wore every day. It was heart-shaped, but the key bit at the bottom had always seemed like a decorative fluke. Julianne pulled it from her neck, inserted it into the stone, and turned. With a heavy thunk, a narrow section of the wall swung inward. It wasn't a room, it was a vault. Inside sat a single leather-bound ledger and a small glass vial containing a clear liquid. Julianne opened the ledger. It wasn't about shipping or oil. It was a log of payments, thousands of dollars a month, to a Blackwood sanitarium. The name on the patient file clipped to the back made Julianne's blood run cold. Sarah Thorne. "My mother," Julianne whispered. "She didn't run away. He told us she left us." "She didn't leave," a voice drifted from the shadows of the cellar. Julianne spun around, her flashlight beam cutting through the dark. Marcus was standing by the furnace, his face gaunt. He wasn't holding a drink this time. He was holding a heavy iron poker. "Marcus, you knew?" "I found out a month ago," Marcus said, his voice cracking. "I confronted him. I told him I'd tell you, Jules. That's when the accidents started happening to me, Julianne. The car brakes, the tainted pills. But he didn't kill Mom. Eleanor did." "What are you talking about?" "Look at the vial, Julianne," Marcus shouted, his eyes wide with terror. "That's not medicine. It's what she was using on him. And now?" He looked behind her, his expression shifting from anger to pure horror. The basement lights flickered, once, twice. From the top of the stairs, the door clicked shut. The heavy iron bolt slid into place. They were locked in. Then, the faint hissing sound of gas began to whistle through the vents. The hiss was rhythmic, a sinister, mechanical sigh that filled the cramped blue room. The scent hit Julianne a second later. Not the sulfur of natural gas, but something sickly sweet, like overripe almonds. "Cyanide," Julianne whispered, her lungs hitching. "Marcus, we have to move." Marcus scrambled toward the heavy oak door, slamming his shoulder against it. "It's bolted from the outside. That bitch, she's going to end us both and claim we committed a double suicide in our grief." Julianne ignored the door. She knew the architecture of Thorne Manor. It was a fortress designed to keep things in. She turned back to the small vault she had just opened. "The ledger! Marcus! The vault!" she shouted over the sound of the gas. "If there's a way for my mother's records to get in here, there has to be a ventilation shaft or a secondary exit." The narrow escape. She scrambled into the tiny stone alcove, her flashlight beam dancing wildly. Behind the shelf where the ledger had sat, she saw it. A small, rusted iron grate no larger than a dinner plate. It was a coal chute, long since abandoned but still connected to the exterior of the house. "Help me!" she cried. Together they wrenched the grate free. The screech of metal on stone sent Julianne's teeth on edge. The opening was a narrow, vertical tunnel clogged with decades of soot and cobwebs. "Go, Jules! You're smaller!" Marcus coughed, his face turning a terrifying shade of gray. Julianne didn't argue. She scrambled into the chute, the rough bricks scraping her skin as she clawed her way upward. It was a suffocating, blind climb. Just as her lungs felt ready to burst, she felt a gust of freezing Maine air. She kicked at the exterior cover, bursting through into the mud and rain of the garden. She didn't stop to breathe. She ran to the cellar bulkhead, heaving the heavy wooden doors open from the outside. Marcus tumbled out, gasping and retching, his body shaking with tremors. The House of Mirrors. "Stay here," Julianne commanded, her voice cold with a newfound fury. Call the police. Use the emergency line." "Where are you going?" Marcus wheezed. "To find Caleb and to finish this." Julianne entered the house through the kitchen, grabbing a heavy silver carving knife from the block. The manor was deathly silent now. She reached the library, expecting to find Caleb at the monitors. Instead, she found the room trashed. The monitors were smashed, the glass glittering like diamonds on the rug. And there, slumped in the high-backed leather chair, was Caleb. His head was bleeding, and his hands were zip-tied behind his back. "Caleb!" Julianne rushed to him, slicing through the plastic ties. He groaned, blinking his eyes into focus. "Jules, get out! It's not Eleanor!" Julianne froze. "What do you mean?" "The toxicology report," Caleb rasped, clutching his side. "I misread it. Eleanor wasn't the one paying the clinic. She was the one being tested. She thought Elias was poisoning her." A slow, rhythmic clapping echoed from the gallery above. Julianne looked up. Standing on the mezzanine was Eleanor, but she looked different. Her hair was disheveled, and her eyes were wide with a frantic, paralyzing fear. She wasn't holding a weapon. She was looking behind her. A figure emerged from the shadows of the hallway, holding a suppressed pistol to Eleanor's spine. It was Arthur, the Thorne family's quiet, invisible butler, the man who had served Julianne's father for 40 years. "You always were the clever one, Julianne. Your father was a weak man. He didn't have the stomach to keep your mother hidden forever. He started feeling guilty in his old age. He was going to confess. He was going to ruin everything I built for this family." "You killed him," Julianne said, stepping in front of Caleb. "And you've been framing Eleanor." Eleanor was an easy target, a trophy wife with a penchant for expensive things, Arthur sneered, nudging Eleanor forward. And Caleb here, he was getting too close to the paper trail. But don't worry, the narrative is already written. A tragic fire started by a distraught daughter and her addict brother. Eleanor and the lawyer caught in the crossfire. Only the loyal servant survives to tell the tale. He raised the suppressed pistol, aiming it directly at Julianne's heart. "Eleanor, wait!" Eleanor screamed. At that moment, the library's grand-grandfather clock began to chime. The sound was deafening in the tense silence. Clang, clang. Julianne saw Caleb's hand move toward the heavy brass lamp on the desk. She looked Arthur in the eye, her voice steady. "You forgot one thing, Arthur. This isn't your house. It's mine." As the third chime struck, Julianne threw the carving knife. The silver carving knife spun through the air, a flash of lightning in the dim library. It didn't find Arthur's heart. He was too fast for that. But it buried itself deep in his shoulder. He cried out, the suppressed pistol discharging with a muffled thud, the bullet splintering the mahogany desk inches from Julianne's hip. "Now!" Caleb roared. With a surge of adrenaline, Caleb swung the heavy brass lamp. It caught Arthur across the knees, sending the older man crashing into the mezzanine railing. Eleanor seized the moment, diving toward the stairs, her silk robes fluttering like the wings of a panicked bird. The revelation. "You're a parasite, Arthur!" Julianne screamed, rushing toward the stairs. "You kept my mother in that sanitarium not for my father, but for leverage!" Arthur scrambled to his feet, blood soaking through his white shirt. He looked like a cornered animal. "Leverage? No, Julianne, for equity. Your father was going to sell the company to a conglomerate 10 years ago. If he had, my pension, the millions I'd skimmed over the decades, would have been discovered by the auditors. I needed him tied to a secret so dark he could never leave this house. And I needed you gone." He fumbled for the gun he'd dropped, but Caleb was already on him. The two men grappled at the top of the stairs, a blur of charcoal wool and blood-stained linen. "The vial!" Marcus shouted from the doorway. He had returned, staggering and pale, holding a flare gun he'd retrieved from the mudroom's emergency kit. "Jules, the vial you found in the vault. It's not poison. It's the sedative Arthur used to keep Mom quiet when he moved her." Julianne's head spun. Moved her? Where is she, Arthur? Arthur let out a wheezing laugh as Caleb pinned him against the railing. She's closer than you think. Why do you think your father never let anyone into the West Wing attic? Why do you think the ghosts of Thorne Manor always sounded so human? The final spark. The realization hit Julianne like a physical blow. Her mother wasn't miles away at a sanitarium. She was here, in the house, above their heads. "Marcus, the attic, go!" Julianne yelled. But Arthur wasn't finished. With a hidden strength born of pure malice, he shoved Caleb back and pulled a small remote from his pocket. "If I can't have the Thorne legacy, no one will." He pressed the button. A series of muffled explosions rocked the foundations of the house. Arthur hadn't just used gas in the cellar, he'd rigged the vintage oxygen tanks in the infirmary wing to blow. Within seconds, the smell of smoke began to curl under the library doors. The dry, century-old wood of the manor took to the flame like parchment. "Caleb, get Eleanor out," Julianne commanded. "Not without you. I have to get my mother. Go!" Caleb hesitated for a heartbeat, the agony of 10 years of loss written on his face. He grabbed Eleanor's arm, hauling her toward the servants' entrance, just as a support beam collapsed in a shower of sparks. The attic and the aftermath. Julianne sprinted up the final flight of stairs, the air growing hot and thin. She reached the West Wing door, a heavy, reinforced oak slab. She threw her weight against it, screaming her mother's name. "Mom! Sarah! Can you hear me?" From behind the door, a thin, tremulous voice answered. "Elias? Is that you? Is it time for the garden?" Julianne smashed the lock with a fire extinguisher from the hall. The door gave way. Inside was a room that looked like a frozen capsule of the 1990s, her mother's favorite books, her easel, and a woman with hair as white as snow sitting by a window that was boarded shut. "Mom, it's Julianne. We're leaving, now." She grabbed the frail woman, shielding her from the heat as they descended the back stairs. The manor was a towering inferno, the orange glow illuminating the fog of Blackwood Bay for miles. The shore of new beginnings. Julianne collapsed onto the wet grass of the cliffside, her mother shivering in her arms. Marcus was there, coughing but alive, and Caleb. Caleb was running toward her, his face streaked with soot and tears. They watched in silence as Thorne Manor, the house of secrets, the house of shadows, collapsed into a heap of burning timber. The 30-day clause was gone, the ledger was ash, but as the sun began to rise over the Atlantic, the air felt clean for the first time in a decade. Caleb knelt beside her, his hand finding hers in the dark. "It's over, Jules, truly over." Julianne looked at her mother, who was staring at the sea with wide, wondering eyes. Then she looked at Caleb. The betrayal was behind them. The suspense had ended in fire. What remained was the truth. "No," Julianne whispered, leaning her head on Caleb's shoulder. "It's just beginning." The Embers of Truth. 6 months later. The new Thorne estate was a minimalist glass structure overlooking the same jagged cliffs of Blackwood Bay. The charred remains of the old manor had been cleared away, but the soil still smelled of smoke whenever it rained. Julianne sat on the terrace, watching her mother, Sarah, paint. Sarah was quiet now, her mind a fragmented mirror of the past, but she was safe. Caleb stepped out onto the deck, sliding a glass of chilled white wine toward Julianne. He looked relaxed. The weight of the Thorne legal battles had finally settled. "The final insurance settlement came through today," Caleb said, leaning against the railing. "You're officially the wealthiest woman in the state, Jules. Arthur is locked away for life, and Marcus is doing well in that clinic in Vermont." Julianne smiled, taking a sip of the wine. "I never wanted the money, Caleb. I just wanted the truth." "And you got it," he said, kissing the top of her head. "I'm going to head inside to finish the closing papers on the shipping merger. I'll be back in a minute." As Caleb walked away, Julianne reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, charred object she had recovered from the ruins of the library months ago. It was Arthur's burner phone, partially melted but with the SIM card intact. She had spent weeks having a specialist recover the data. She swiped the screen, looking at the final message sent on the night of her father's death. It wasn't sent to a hitman. It wasn't sent to a secret accomplice. The message was sent to Caleb. The message: "She's at the gate. Everything is in place. If she stays 30 days, the transfer goes to the offshore account we discussed. Don't let her leave." Julianne felt a drop of ice water run down her spine. Caleb hadn't helped Elias write the will to protect her. He had helped write it to ensure Julianne stayed long enough for a massive secret transfer of funds to be triggered. Funds that disappeared the night of the fire. Caleb hadn't saved her from Arthur. He had simply eliminated a business partner who had become a liability. Julianne looked at the glass of wine Caleb had just poured for her. The liquid was clear, sparkling, and beautiful, but was there a faint, familiar scent of almonds, or was it just her imagination? From inside the house, she heard Caleb's voice, warm and loving. "Everything okay out there, Jules?" Julianne looked at her mother, then at the wine, then at the door where the man she loved was waiting. She slowly picked up the glass and raised it to her lips. "Everything is perfect, Caleb," she whispered to the empty air. She didn't drink. She poured the wine silently into the dirt of a potted lily, watching the soil soak it up. Then she put on her best Thorne smile, the cold, deceptive mask she had learned from her father, and walked inside to meet her husband. The game wasn't over. It had just moved into a much nicer house.